All right, let's jump in and watch how this guy lived a miserable life, cursing the fake friend who scammed his investments. Even though he refused, at first his friend pushed so hard that he ended up signing those papers anyway. Back then, he completely missed the wicked smirk on his friend's face. Now in the present, he was barely surviving. Drowning in debt, his life was an absolute mess. His only escape was his favorite novel, Dark Header. He had read it hundreds of times, yet it always felt strangely fresh, like the story came alive in a different way each time. By this point, he knew almost every single detail of those pages by heart. Suddenly, he noticed something strange. 2 feathers floated outside his window, glowing with a soft purple energy. Before he could even react, his nose began to bleed heavily. A sharp pain stabbed his chest. He barely had time to react before everything went completely dark. The next second, he woke up in a completely different place, thinking it was just a dream. But this bedroom was far too luxurious to belong to someone like him. Looking out the window, he spotted dozens of crows in a nearby tree, with one staring right at him. Trying to stay calm, he assumed he was dreaming, but the crows suddenly got friendly, leaving him totally baffled. Now watch closely. As he walked to the window, he saw 3 suns and an enormous, strangely familiar city. When he finally caught his reflection in the mirror, the truth hit him like a lightning bolt. He was now the 7th prince of the Aberrant Empire. Just then, a maid named Anna called him from outside. Panicked, he tried to stop her from entering, but lost his balance and crashed to the floor. Somehow, Anna seemed to get the hint and immediately promised to come back at a later time. Hearing her voice and seeing his surroundings confirmed his fears. He was trapped inside the novel Dark Header. But there was a massive problem. Out of everyone, he had transmigrated as Prince Ranabiran. Unlike the other powerful princes, Ran was destined to die a miserable death at the very beginning of the novel. Alone in his bedroom, cursing his rotten luck, a voice behind him suddenly spoke, introducing himself as Sein. The prince's expression completely froze on hearing that name. He knew exactly who this man was and what he was really after. Sein pointed out that the prince had skipped dinner, claiming his concern made him visit in person to check on his health. The boy, who was no longer the old prince, took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. He had to keep his composure. Staring directly into Sein's eyes, he assured him that he was feeling much better. Sein ordered the table to be set. Immediately, Anna complied, placing the food right before the young prince. Her hands were visibly trembling throughout the entire process. Looking at the plates, Ranabiran could barely believe they served such unappealing food to royalty, and accidentally burning his hand on the hot kettle made it worse. "This is going to surprise you too." Anna's face went completely pale, as if a catastrophe had struck. She threw herself to the floor, begging for forgiveness, even though she did nothing wrong. Witnessing the maid's sheer terror, Ran remembered a critical detail about this body's original owner. The real Ranabiran possessed an awful temper, regularly beating the staff over the smallest inconvenience. No wonder even the slightest mistake triggered absolute panic among the entire palace staff. Meanwhile, Sein fake smiled, pretending to be relieved that the prince was recovering well. However, the secretary quickly revealed the real motive behind his visit, laying several documents out on the table. Just looking at them, Rand sensed danger. Knowing the novel's plot, he knew these were fake documents, crafted solely to steal the prince's massive fortune. The original Rand would have signed them blindly, turning himself into easy prey for his greedy secretary. Sein looked amused by his hesitation, mocking him for not signing the papers right away. That mockery brought back bitter memories of his past life. He remembered the contract that ruined him and the blind trust he once wasted on a fake friend. The similarities were impossible to ignore, and in that exact moment, a fierce new determination was born. Instead of signing, he coldly pointed out errors in the calculations, questioning the ridiculous expenses listed. Sein looked absolutely stunned that this useless prince had actually noticed the fraud. "Let's see if the secretary can pressure him. Trust me, you cannot miss what comes next. Come along with me to see how Rand takes a stand, refusing to be anyone's puppet ever again." As tension in the room escalated, Rand deliberately dropped a pocket watch. The expensive piece shattered against the rug, sending fragments flying everywhere. With total audacity, he pretended it slipped, but every single move was coldly calculated. Knowing Sin had far less power than he boasted, Rand decided to teach this arrogant secretary a harsh lesson. The pure hatred on Sin's face proved that his provocation was working flawlessly. Leaving absolutely no room for excuses, Ran blamed him, claiming his distraction caused the costly accident. Pointing to the mess on the floor, he ordered the secretary to clean it with his bare hands. The command froze him. In this empire, royal blood commanded absolute authority that bordered on the divine itself. Even if Ran Aberon was deemed the black sheep of the royalty, his status was still light years above a mere secretary. Sin could barely suppress his deep, boiling resentment. Deep down, he despised the prince. And that black hair only fueled his belief that Ran was an absolute disgrace. Still, the sheer weight of imperial blood left him with absolutely no other choice. Swallowing his pride, he dropped to his knees and cleaned the mess, barely holding back his rage. Pay close attention here, because just as the secretary finished, Ran casually kicked over another cup right before his eyes. The secretary stared in utter disbelief, while the prince coldly remarked that practice makes perfect for cleaning duties. Such a brutal humiliation pushed Sin to his absolute limit. But since he lacked the power to rebel openly, he threatened to report this directly to the Empress. Unfortunately for him, Ran knew that hollow threat was completely useless. The secretary had no direct line to royals and was merely riding on power that wasn't his own. Then Ran glanced at Akon and ordered her to cover her ears. Terrified, she immediately obeyed without hesitation. Ensuring she couldn't hear a thing, Ran began exposing secrets that were supposed to be impossible for him to know. He laid bare the embezzlement schemes and crimes the secretary had meticulously hidden for years. With every single accusation, the secretary turned pale, as if staring face to face with death itself. Soon rumors spread among the staff. Anna and the other maids whispered about the prince's sudden bizarre change in attitude. Somehow he now seemed like a much more terrifying man to them. Still, they were relieved he rarely left his quarters, giving them a much-needed break in their daily routine. Meanwhile, Ran spent his quiet afternoons lounging in the palace library. Staring at the cloudy sky, you and I can see how well he has adapted to his new role. The servants avoided him like the plague, and the secretary had vanished entirely after their tense confrontation. Since the original storyline wouldn't start for another year, he finally let his guard down for once. Memories of his past life resurfaced, remembering that specific book in the library that had completely captivated him. Now that he was living inside this very world, he planned to enjoy the peace before the real protagonist finally arrived. Staring at the endless sky, he couldn't help but dream of how amazing it would be to fly freely. Suddenly, an agonizing pain ripped through his body. The cup slipped, shattering as intense suffering completely overwhelmed him. Unlike the pain he felt when dying in his previous life, this was entirely different, like his whole being was cast directly into a raging furnace. A moment later, Akon entered the library to perform her routine cleaning duties. Finding the room seemingly empty, she felt relieved not to spot the troublesome prince anywhere. Her gaze was soon drawn to the broken cup on the floor. Seeing such a valuable item ruined saddened her, thinking how its worth could have saved her struggling family. Suddenly, a strange noise echoed from the bookshelves, and a red-eyed raven emerged from the shadows, terrifying her. The bird circled the room as Anna watched it, completely baffled by its presence. Clueless about how it got inside, she finally managed to catch the mysterious creature. Holding the raven, she warned it that a dangerous man lived here. Hearing this, Ran uncovered a shocking truth you and I never saw coming. Get ready, because you and I are about to watch this guy wake up transformed into the very crow Anna holds. Before he can even react, Anna drags him straight to the window and throws him out into empty air. Pure panic takes over as the hard ground rushes up at absolute lightning speed. With wind roaring in his face, Ran struggles desperately to save himself until a sudden survival instinct kicks in. He focuses every ounce of strength on his wings, and to his surprise, his new body responds instantly. That frantic flapping slows his rapid descent, and he finally manages to stabilize himself in midair. Instead of smashing onto the stone below, he floats majestically right over the beautiful royal gardens. After practicing in the sky, he flies back to the palace and discovers that reclaiming his human form is totally possible. Ran quickly realizes he can change his physical shape whenever he wants, using only his sheer willpower. Though this power is incredibly useful, it presents a massive problem since nothing like this existed in the original story. Since this skill was not in dark header, exposing it ruins everything. Watch closely because things are about to get complicated. Keeping this secret is his only choice. Anna interrupts his deep thoughts by announcing that the monthly royal ritual is starting, instantly catching his full attention. At first glance, it looks like a typical ceremonial event, but those who know the empire know its true meaning. This is a succession test where the royal family must prove their strength and talent before the emperor himself. Since he only read about this in the novel, Ran is incredibly curious to witness it firsthand. Shortly after he enters the grand hall to join the rest of the high nobility, the sheer contrast between him and his royal blood relatives could not be more obvious. His siblings flaunt striking golden hair and commanding gazes, while his own pitch-black hair makes him look like a cheap shadow. One of the royal princes quickly targets him with a look of pure hostility. The culprit is Salos Aaron, the 8th prince and his half-brother, who immediately starts throwing condescending insults his way. But Ran decides to ignore him completely, making his insufferable brother even angrier. Fortunately, the first princess steps in and puts an immediate end to the argument, forcing the younger prince to shut up. As they sit, Ran closely studies the seating arrangement. You probably guessed it, but these seats reveal exactly who holds all the real power. In this empire, strength comes from Mani's energy. Those born with lighter hair possess massive amounts of it, giving them a huge advantage. And since Ran has black hair and absolutely zero manas, he gets pushed to the very bottom. But all chatter stops the moment the emperor makes his grand entrance. Every single royal member stands up instantly to show their ultimate respect to the ruler. The ruler calmly sits down and begins the ceremony, showing nothing but total boredom on his face. Right before him lies Prasa, a sacred ancient relic passed down from the empire's first founder. This mysterious stone tablet measures a person's manas to show their exact level of power. The moment the emperor touches it, a brilliant, blinding blue light completely fills the grand room. The powerful shockwave surges down the table, demonstrating an overwhelming level unreachable for any other mortal present. After displaying his sheer strength, he openly dares his children to compare their weak energy with his. Nobody feels insulted because the outcome is obvious, but the first prince confidently steps forward. This is pure routine for him. He loves reminding everyone why he is the rightful heir. In a world where Manas is absolutely everything, showing off this power solidifies his claim. Confidently, he releases a massive burst of magic before the crowd. But suddenly, everything goes terribly wrong, and the prince's confident expression turns to absolute horror. Seconds later, he begins violently coughing up blood, staining the elegant marble floor of the hall. Panic erupts across the entire room as panicked servants and nobles run around in absolute chaos. While chaos takes over the palace, only Ran understands the dark truth behind what is happening. In the original novel, the first prince was not supposed to catch this strange illness for 6 months. This tragedy happened way too early, and trust me, the destiny we knew has changed forever. Let's dive into this together. The prince's sudden collapse and transformation happened way sooner than expected. Since the original 7th prince never possessed Manas or the power to transform. Staring at the chaos, Ran realized his arrival had changed far more than he ever expected. The ritual threw the palace into complete chaos, but nobody suffered more than the first prince. Everything was normal that morning, but now his own body completely refused to obey him. Every single attempt to circulate Manas caused him unbearable pain. As the agony built up, he fell to his knees, unable to comprehend why this was happening to him. The very thought was completely intolerable. He was the first prince, the destined heir to the throne, born to become the emperor. Unlike the common people, he spent his entire life believing he stood far above everyone else. Despair crushed his confidence as he gripped a dagger, trying desperately to regain control of his emotions. Right then, a voice echoed from the shadows, calmly advising him to drop the pipe if he wanted to live. The prince threw the pipe toward the voice, his eyes widening in shock, as a familiar figure stepped out. And pay attention here, it was none other than Ran Aaron. The intruder looked completely relaxed, despite bypassing the palace's tightest security. The prince demanded explanations, immediately, unable to understand how someone could sneak into his private chambers unseen. Ran just smiled, noting that if he had come as an assassin, this conversation would have ended long ago. That chilling warning only intensified the prince's sheer shock. When asked how he got in, Ran casually mentioned he simply climbed the palace's outer wall. It barely mattered if the prince believed him. To Ran, His entry method was nothing compared to the prince's pathetic state of health. Instead of giving a straight answer, the prince just sneered. Suddenly he burst into a crazed laugh, revealing that he had already reached a very clear conclusion. Thinking himself clever, he accused Ran of poisoning him to blackmail him for future leverage. Fully convinced he knew the truth, the prince tried to strike out furiously at his younger brother. Before the blow landed, Ran calmly warned him that this suffering was only the beginning. In a week, the pain would be so unbearable, he would beg for it to stop. Those words froze his attack for the first time. Doubt showed on the prince's face, as Ran explained he had not poisoned him or made any secret plans. And trust me, not even our main character knew who was responsible for this mysterious illness. The only certainty was that the prince's condition would worsen drastically unless he took action. With unusual seriousness, Ran warned him that this conversation was his final chance to save himself. Every word carried such heavy weight that it was impossible to ignore the warning. After delivering his message, Ran transformed into a crow and escaped through the window. Flying into the stormy night, he thought how lucky it was that the prince lacked the courage to follow. Left alone in his chambers, the first prince stood in silence as despair slowly consumed him. That terrified prince would become a highly useful pawn. From now on, the crow form would be ideal for traveling long distances. Everything seemed to go smoothly until a sudden intense sensation of danger washed over him. Days later, back at the palace, Ran spent 2 whole days isolated in his room planning his next move. Outside the door, Akon grew increasingly anxious. The prince was neither eating nor making a sound, triggering her deepest fears. If anything happened to an imperial member under her care, the consequences would be absolutely disastrous. Unable to bear her anxiety any longer, she knocked on the door, calling out cautiously. Seconds later, the door finally swung open. Startled by the prince's sudden appearance, Anna lost her balance and fell inside, sending the food from her tray flying across the floor. She hit the ground face first, her expression twisted in pure, absolute panic. Ran stared at the mess without showing an ounce of empathy as Anna desperately apologized from the floor. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she begged for forgiveness, completely unable to form proper words. The scene reminded Ran of the sheer terror the staff still felt toward the body's original owner. A tiny mistake was enough to scare them. But you and I will watch everything change. All right, come along with me as we see Ran demand payback for his dirty shoes, but decide against causing a massive scene. Instead, he ordered him to clean everything within 5 minutes and get out immediately. He also banned him from entering his chambers without permission. After all, he just wanted a little peace and quiet. Time moved on, and a month quickly passed since that disastrous ritual which changed everything inside the palace. Rumors soon spread that the first prince had lost his manic, stripping away the power that secured his high position. To the other princes and princesses, this gossip was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The balance of power within the imperial family began to shake after so many peaceful years. To silence the rumors, the first prince convinced the emperor to move up this year's grand royal hunt. Nobles and royals quickly gathered for the event, but as he rode through the forest, Ran was focused on a completely different matter. The massive question lingering in his mind was whether these drastic changes had already affected the protagonist of Dark Header. Today was the day to find out. So Ran began searching quietly through the massive crowd. Now pay attention here. The real hero was nearby, and seeing him would show us how much this world had already changed. Finding out if the future remained intact, or if everything had shifted, was something he had to solve immediately. Shortly after Salos Aran approached him with his signature look of pure contempt, the 8th prince began mocking him, calling him a bug, and sneering that the black steed matched his dark soul perfectly. Instead of answering, Ran brushed off every insult and simply continued on his way. That complete indifference made Salos even angrier, though Ran could not care less about his childish tantrum. Finally, the massive royal procession arrived at the towering Tower of Beginning, a colossal structure at the imperial forest entrance where they held the opening ritual for the grand hunt every year. While many viewed it as a simple game, those familiar with imperial politics understood the true purpose behind it. The hunt was the perfect stage for the royal family to show off their power to the entire nobility. Even the emperor himself understood that this event was about gaining political influence, not wild prey. Okay, let's watch this closely. Rezia, the first prince, stepped forward on the emperor's command to begin the ceremonial display. One of his brothers jokingly asked if he already had a prize in mind for when he won. Razia confidently declared that victory was already his, and that his wish was fully decided. His bold words carried the ultimate confidence of a man destined to be the direct heir to the throne. And though the nobles praised him publicly, they kept whispering behind his back about his mysterious illness. Raya caught a few of these quiet remarks and instantly remembered Rand's warning from a month ago. Doubt crept deep into his mind, despite his best efforts to ignore it. Meanwhile, Rand watched everything from afar, with a slight smirk, knowing exactly what was about to happen next. Razia then activated his Manus, unleashing a brutal storm of pure energy. Dark clouds covered the sky as fierce winds whipped the area, creating a giant blue vortex rising toward the heavens. The overwhelming pressure of the ritual forced the shocked spectators to step back. Several princes ordered the local nobles back while watching the massive display in utter awe. In the middle of the storm, Razia roared his name and declared himself the future ruler of the empire. His voice echoed through the mountains as a massive wave of water erupted upward, drowning the area in intense blue light. That incredible spectacle left everyone completely speechless. Rain began to fall from the sky, and not a single soul could hide their sheer amazement. Even veteran generals were left jaw-dropped, with one muttering that this was the true power of the imperial bloodline. Instantly, nobles and soldiers began chanting Rasha's name at the top of their lungs. The prince sighed in relief. But you and I know the real truth, that Rand was hiding behind this sudden miracle. 1 month earlier, inside the prince's private bedchamber, he secretly handed Raya a special stone and ordered him to constantly channel his Manus into it. According to Rand, this device would absorb the corrupted Manus and temporarily halt the strange illness eating away his body. And though that wild explanation sounded highly doubtful back then, pure desperation forced Raya to obey him. All right, you and I are about to see that Ron knows that stone only delays the inevitable. That artifact should have appeared much later in the story, and it was never going to solve the problem forever. A terrified servant rushed over to Rand with a large bag, shaking completely even as he spoke. He was terrified of making a mistake before the infamous seventh prince, and once confirmed, Rand sent him away. Suddenly a loud horn echoed through the area as the emperor raised his hand, looking serious at everyone. With that signal, the royal hunt officially began. Riders charged into the imperial forest while nobles doubted if competing was even worth it. Most assumed a royal family member would win, regardless of effort, but Rand had zero interest in victory. He calmly guided his horse into the thick woods, focused on an entirely different objective. His real target was Agony Fetty, the former knight commander and key player for future events. Not far off, Agony listened to a servant praise the terrifying power shown during the ritual. The Duke noted the Emperor's real goal was to crush noble pride and remind everyone who's boss. His servant nervously advised keeping his comments quiet, but Agony just laughed, completely ignoring the danger. Pay attention here. Rand was already heading into the forest. The hunting grounds were split into 3 regions for small, medium, and large prey. Checking a map, he recalled a key detail from the novel Dark Header. In this hunt, the protagonist would gift a rare golden fox to the Emperor, capturing everyone's attention. Knowing this, Rand spent weeks scouting as a crow, since the novel hinted at the creature's habitat. After connecting the dots, Rand deduced the creature lived near a hidden lake deep in the forest. If his data was correct, the protagonist would show up right there. Arriving first would let him confirm if the original plot was still on the exact same course. Confident in his plan, Rand moved ahead. Relieved Sechan delivered the requested bag on time. Once that bag reached the hands of Agony Fetus, his master plan would run smoothly. You and I know how this goes. His horse suddenly bolted, almost throwing him off. Caught completely off guard, Ron struggled to balance while shouting at the stubborn beast to stop. After a chaotic wild ride through the woods, the horse finally came to a halt. Thinking the animal might be injured, Rand dismounted to inspect it carefully. He wondered if it saw a predator, but the horse was calm, and then he realized. The horse refused to carry that heavy bag. Annoyed Rand scolded the stubborn animal for its total lack of work ethic. Far from feeling guilty, the horse stomped the ground with its hoof in protest. And before Rand could react, it spun around and bolted away at full speed. Absolute silence. Left alone in the middle of nowhere with a heavy bag, Rand watched his only ride disappear into the distance, deep inside that very forest. Agony Fetus continued hunting with his loyal assistant Tolan, though the old Duke cared little for common prey. Wolves and deer were no match for a man who spent his entire life on battlefields. As he rode, he reflected on the passage of time, admitting old age was finally catching up. Even though countless people viewed him as a living legend, Agony felt like just an old soldier whose best years were fading, but Toland immediately rejected that. To him, the Duke remained one of the greatest heroes in the entire empire. His victories as commander protected the nation in 1,000 battles, and nobody could match his achievements. Even so, Agony simply smiled and kept looking forward. After a long silence, the Duke asked if he ever saw the imperial family close up, and the youth admitted only from afar. Hearing that response suddenly brought back some very old memories. He remembered explaining to his son that imperial blood was above mere mortals chosen by the heavens. Their family served the throne for generations, and his son would inherit that duty. Trust me, do not miss what comes next. Let's dive into how this proud Duke remembered showing his son their family trading empire and teaching him about duty. Yet out of all his memories, one dark incident remained completely impossible to forget. During a trip through the imperial capital, his carriage suddenly screeched to a halt after something jammed the wheel. As the driver went down to check, Duke Agony spotted a severely injured child lying on the ground. The grim scene suggested a terrible accident had happened moments before. According to reports back then, the boy was a thief caught trying to steal from a temple. Such tragedies were common. But despite that explanation, Agony could never erase that horrific sight from his mind. That haunting memory grew even more vivid when he recalled his young son's reaction. Curious about the commotion, the young boy tried climbing out of the carriage to investigate. Agony ordered him to stay inside, shielding his eyes from the horror. Even years later, he still wondered if tragedy truly lurked around every single corner. No matter how noble or prosperous this great empire claimed to be, Talon's voice suddenly snapped him back. Pay attention. Because here we go. His assistant reminded him they needed to move if they wanted to protect the family honor during the royal hunt. Nodding, Agony admitted he knew the perfect spot to find the golden fox, while Ranabiran faced a much less elegant struggle. Still lugging the heavy bag his runaway horse had dumped on the ground, he ran through the forest, cursing under his breath, every step reminding him of his horse's shameless betrayal. Turning into a crow would solve his problems instantly, but doing that meant abandoning his valuable bag behind. Since the contents were vital for his plans with Agony Phoedius, that option was completely out of the question. To make matters worse, this thick forest was dangerous. Wild beasts could attack, and Ran had zero combat skills or weapons. Suddenly, a strange rustling sound echoed nearby, making him freeze right in his tracks. His mind immediately raced to the worst scenarios facing imminent danger. He considered dropping the bag and running, so he grabbed a stone and threw it toward the noise, hoping to distract whatever beast was lurking out there. The rock sailed beautifully through the branches, showing off some truly impressive accuracy. Unfortunately, it hit no beast, and trust me, you can already guess the absolute disaster that followed. That cursed rock hit Talon smack in the face, knocking him out cold on the spot. Hiding in the bushes, Ran watched the scene unfold in absolute staggering disbelief. Of all the targets in this massive forest, he managed to strike the one person he should never have touched. Seeing Talon collapsed on the dirt, Agony's face hardened. And this Duke was definitely not your average noble. In the future timeline, he would become the protagonist's mentor and an incredibly respected leader of the Empire. Ran had meticulously crafted a genius plan that revolved around this powerful Duke. He wanted to wait near the golden fox, accuse the Duke of stealing his prey, and kickstart their relationship. But now, because of this stupid accident, his perfect scheme had completely crumbled into pieces. Instead of securing an epic first impression, he literally threw a rock at the Duke's main assistant. Examining the stone, the Duke instantly grew suspicious. It felt like a deliberate attack from a lurking assassin. Fortunately, after a few tense minutes, Talon slowly regained consciousness and sat right up. Breathing a sigh of relief, the Duke began questioning his assistant to uncover their cowardly attacker. Hiding just meters away, Ran felt his soul leave his body. If Talon remembered anything, it was over. He was completely finished. Meanwhile, the poor assistant closed his eyes, desperately trying to remember the blow. Watching him think only spiked Ran's panic. Offending this immensely powerful family was literal suicide. It basically meant a swift death sentence, with zero protection. But then, something entirely unexpected happened. Despite all that immense tension, Talon remembered absolutely nothing, and besides a minor forehead scratch, he was fine. Embarrassed by his own carelessness, he simply apologized for not seeing the attack coming. This perfect excuse let Rand finally breathe, though Agony accepted his assistant's answer with heavy suspicion. The Duke's instincts were razor sharp, and he knew something was definitely off. Slowly, his gaze shifted directly toward Rand's hiding spot, and that is where you and I leave him today. Let's dive into this total chaos where Duke Agony orders Tolan to stay back while he chases down the mysterious attacker. And Rand had absolutely no one else to blame for this. He sprinted through the forest as fast as possible, but escaping a legendary hero on pure speed alone, basically impossible. His lungs were burning with exhaustion, and that heavy bag made every step agonizing. Still, he kept pushing forward, hoping he had gained enough distance to lose Duke Agony. That hope shattered the very next second, when Agony appeared right behind him. Keeping up an incredible pace for his age, the Duke demanded the attackers show their face, and Rand realized he was going to get caught very soon. He considered dropping the bag and turning into a crow, but that would ruin his entire plan. So he tried something else. Suddenly, a strange darkness began swirling around his feet. Now watch closely. This mysterious energy launches him forward with explosive power, leaving even Duke Agony in absolute shock. The Duke could not believe it. Frustrated, he swung his sword wildly but struck nothing. By the time he reached the forest clearing, his target had completely vanished. Meanwhile, Rand felt something bizarre. His body became so light he wondered if he had accidentally transformed mid-run. Before he could figure it out, the sound of galloping hooves echoed nearby. Looking over, he found himself staring right at a horse running alongside him. Elsewhere in the forest, the royal hunt was proceeding without any issues. Several princes were already bragging to impress the emperor and the nobles, with one posing proudly next to a massive bear he hunted. Another nobleman congratulated him, mentioning that his victory seemed practically guaranteed at this point. Accepting the praise with a smug smile, the prince revealed he already knew exactly what reward he would demand from the emperor. Far from the celebrations, Rand collapsed under a tree and stared up at the sky. Pure exhaustion took over his entire body. But the worst part, he had lost the bag. I know exactly what you are thinking right now. Lying on the grass, covering his face, Rand regretted losing the key piece of his plan. Everything had started going downhill the moment he accidentally attacked Talon in the woods. Finally, he forced himself up. Giving up was not an option. If the bag fell during the chase, he could still find it. Meanwhile, Duke Agony and Tolan had finally met back up. The Duke checked on his assistant, asking how he felt. Though slightly dizzy, Tolan insisted his wound was minor. The conversation shifted to their failed chase, with Agony admitting he had completely lost track of his target. He could not tell if that guy was just incredibly fast or if old age was finally catching up to him. Right then, Talon spotted something strange. A bag was lying discarded in the tall grass. The Duke picked it up, curious. It looked expensive from the outside, but opening it only deepened the mystery. The bag was filled with stones. Hiding nearby, Rand watched them, completely losing his cool when he recognized his bag. Overcome with panic, he ran straight toward them. His sudden arrival startled them both, and Tolan froze as he recognized him stammering out the seventh prince's name. Seeing a member of royalty, Agony and Tolan immediately bowed, allowing Rand to regain control of the situation. With an incredibly annoyed tone, he demanded to know why they had his belongings in their possession. Agony calmly explained that he had simply stumbled across the bag while patrolling the area. The excuse sounded reasonable, but Rand chose to act highly suspicious on purpose. He pointed out how everyone plays innocent when caught demanding if they were planning to steal it from him. Agony swore on his family honor that they would never do that, quickly changing the subject to Talon's injury. Rand casually asked why the young assistant was bleeding, and Agony went on to explain the previous accident. However, the assistant could not stop staring at the prince with doubt. The more he analyzed the attack, the more familiar it felt. Step by step, Tolan moved forward, his trembling voice giving away that he was on the verge of discovering everything. Grabbing him by the hair, Rand harshly scolded him for speaking without permission and showing disrespect to royalty. He even suggested a sword would fix his insolence. Talk about crazy high tension, right? Terror filled Talon's eyes, leaving him completely speechless. But stick with me, because this is where the Duke steps in to defend his assistant. That gesture did not surprise Rand. Knowing what he remembered about Duke Agoni, that man would never abandon his people. That fierce loyalty was exactly why he would become a legendary mentor in this epic story. Rand decided it was time to make a move toward his real goal. He handed the bag to Agoni, claiming their sudden meeting was a work of destiny. The prince emphasized how incredibly important the contents were, warning him never to lose that bag under any circumstances. While his words sounded simple on the surface, the hidden intention behind them went much deeper. Eagle-Eye accepted the bag, staring intensely at the prince. Their eyes locked for a brief moment, and having achieved his goal, Rand finally took his leave. As he walked away, a sense of relief began to lift the heavy tension from his shoulders. He knew his behavior during the meeting was awful. But pay attention here, because planting doubt in Agoni's mind was absolutely vital. Sometimes, to achieve a goal, you have to play the villain in someone else's story. Once the prince vanished into the woods, Talon immediately apologized for the trouble. Agony brushed off the apology, reminding him that he was incredibly lucky to get away with just a minor scratch. That was when Talon remembered everything. With a dead serious expression, he revealed he finally knew who threw the stone earlier. The true culprit was none other than Ran Aberon. Before he could say another word, Agoni shut him up instantly. The old duke's gaze turned unreadable as he ordered his assistant to stay quiet. Walking away, Ran Aberon reflected on the future he remembered from the novel Dark Header. In the original story, the duke only rebelled against the imperial family after suffering the devastating loss of his beloved son. That tragedy would shatter his lifelong loyalty, pushing him down an inevitable path toward betrayal. If Rand wanted to speed things up, he needed a highly powerful catalyst. The seed was planted, and now all he could do was wait for it to grow. Meanwhile, the royal hunt was finally drawing to a close. Prince Racia finally revealed the wish he would make after being crowned the absolute winner. With a chilling smile, he announced plans to fully urbanize the entire region near the temple. Even though the proposal seemed beneficial at first glance, the true motive was soon exposed. This development would drive out the homeless and needy living there, a decision that seemed perfectly reasonable to most nobles. For others, it was an absolute nightmare. Rand silently concluded that the tragic fate of Duke Agoni was bound to happen. The Duke possessed a deep sense of justice and compassion, traits destined to clash directly with the direction the Empire was taking. And with everything that went down, you and I can see the path to conflict becoming clearer than ever. As the sun dipped below the horizon, hidden deep in the bushes, Rand scanned his surroundings to ensure there were no witnesses. He had checked the area multiple times to make sure his plan remained completely safe. Despite his efforts, a heavy feeling weighed on his chest. Pulling strings from the shadows made him feel less like a hero and far more like a villain. Shortly after, an elegant woman came walking through the forest. The moment Rand spotted her, he instantly knew who she was. It was Mentil Aberon, the first princess, and one of the most powerful figures in the entire imperial family. Her beauty was striking, but what truly unsettled people was that incredibly cold, unreadable expression she always wore. Rand greeted his older sister with deep respect, but Mentil completely ignored the formal etiquette. In her eyes, there was no need for such formalities between siblings sharing the same blood. The conversation quickly took a dangerous turn when Mentil casually asked him where his horse was. Rand made up an excuse on the spot, but unfortunately the princess was not easily fooled. With a freezing stare, she let him know she could see right through his lie. When he nervously asked what she meant, Mentil revealed that her servant found a black horse wandering alone in the forest. Since the beast belonged to Rand and apparently failed to serve royalty properly, she had already ordered it to be put down. That revelation nearly tore him apart. Inside, Rand wanted nothing more than to cry over the loss of his poor horse. Yet outwardly, he quickly dropped to his knees, apologizing for being so incredibly reckless with the creature. Mentil simply told him to stand, remarking that she did not want to seem like a cruel sister, punishing her brother. She was relieved he was safe. And trust me, she even promised to get him a replacement horse for the journey. Let's dive in, because this encounter left Rand more confused than ever. Aberon seemed impossible to read, looking threatening one second, then showing genuine worry the next. Trying to figure out his thoughts felt like solving a puzzle with missing pieces. Once the princess left, we headed to the forest medical tent, where Tolan rested as a doctor checked his nasty forehead wound. The physician looked highly amused, yet thoroughly baffled at the same time. He muttered that getting hit by a rock was normal, but getting hurt so ridiculously was just absurd. When Duke Agony Fetus asked about recovery time, the doctor ordered a full week of bed rest. This news absolutely crushed Tolan. Missing out on the grand tournament was a complete tragedy for him. But Agony quickly reassured him, saying he and Jack would handle everything while he recovered. Seeing his master's genuine care, the young assistant couldn't help but crack a smile. Even after all these years, Agony treated his subordinates like family, joking that he'd never given Tolan a single day off. He teased that his helper's ultimate dream was just eating delicious food and playing video games all day. Watch closely here, this casual talk actually cooled down the heavy tension. He even promised to win the grand prize of the festival to make that dream a reality. Night fell over the camp. The Duke was incredibly protective, often brushing off any threats aimed at those he loved. It was an admirable quality worthy of respect, but highly dangerous when facing an approaching tragedy. Soon his eyes drifted toward the heavy sack of stones that Ran had left in his care. Even without knowing what they were for, he felt obligated to protect them. Picking up the heavy bag, he walked toward a familiar spot. Agony remembered bringing his young son Flynn to this place years ago. During that trip, he shared tales of Sierra the Great, the legendary hero who saved mankind in its darkest hour. Legend had it that Sierra wielded a mystic power unimaginable today. 1,000 years ago, he united warring nations under a single banner, building what is now the mighty Abian Empire. Most importantly, he established the royal bloodline that still rules over the entire continent today. Reliving that memory filled the Duke with deep nostalgia. His son remained the most sacred part of his life. Every single achievement and sacrifice Agony had made was solely to protect his beloved child. He always dreamed that his boy would inherit his noble ideals and serve the crown with pride. But think about it. Why carry that massive sack through total darkness? Why blindly follow Ranabaron's bizarre request when those stones seemed entirely useless? The prince's behavior had always been highly suspicious, and the royal hunt ended much sooner than expected. At the assembly, nobles whispered in shock about the terrifying beast roars heard overnight, with almost everyone sharing the same dark suspicion. Prince Razia dominated the competition so effortlessly that the 4-day event wrapped up in a single night. Such an epic feat left everyone stunned. Before the gathered nobility, Razia was officially crowned the hunt's grand winner. The emperor offered his proud congratulations, while his eldest son thanked him respectfully. By ancient tradition, the grand champion had the right to request any reward. Tension immediately filled the air, as the nobles wondered what the future ruler would demand this time. Kneeling solemnly before the imperial throne, Razia finally revealed his ultimate desire. He claimed the temple's sacred lands were crawling with vagrants, and restoring its dignity demanded immediate drastic measures. Although his speech sounded highly reasonable, the sinister truth behind his words quickly came to light. That malicious proposal would grant him absolute power to banish those helpless people from the region. The moment he heard that, Agony Fetus froze, cold sweat breaking out as dark memories rushed back. Brutal battles from his youth years of military service, and above all, his son's face flashed before him. Every suspicious clue from the past few months clicked, revealing the horrifying future he dreaded most. And that's where we leave it. Agony froze, but his mind is set. Gripping his sword, the Duke stepped forward, to everyone's utter shock, marching straight toward the royals with a drawn weapon. You and I can clearly see that absolute determination. Deep down, she begged her son for forgiveness and swore she would never let them continue down this dark path. Elsewhere, Rand's plan was moving forward. Rand suddenly appeared, calmly ordering him to make his moves very slowly. The prince ordered him to fetch medicine, demanding why he was still resting when the ceremony had already started. Totally confused by those words, Talon asked which ceremony the prince actually meant. That answer sent him running. Completely ignoring his pounding headache, the assistant pushed his way through the massive crowd. When he finally broke through, the scene left him speechless. Agony Fetus was kneeling right there in front of everyone. Pay close attention here. Dozens of armed knights surrounded the Duke, while Raja looked down on him with pure contempt. The first prince demanded an immediate explanation for Agony's sudden actions. The Duke calmly declared that his family had faithfully served the imperial bloodline for over 1,000 years. Generation after generation sacrificed everything for the throne. But somewhere along the way, that loyalty became twisted. Instead of protecting the empire with honor, they used families like his to utterly crush the helpless. After saying this, Agony formally presented his petition straight to the emperor. The ruler listened in absolute silence, cold and unreadable. Finally, the emperor acknowledged the duke's lifelong devotion. He admitted that Agony Fetus had served the empire more faithfully than almost any other living person. But that loyalty brought a cruel irony. Let's pause and look at this. That devotion was now driving him to defy an imperial decree. Slowly, the overwhelming power of the emperor began to gather. His gaze never left the kneeling duke. Under imperial law, defying the throne brought incredibly severe consequences, and Agony understood this better than anyone. Closing his eyes, he calmly accepted responsibility, declaring he would pay for his mistake with his own life, completely shattering Tolan. The assistant screamed his master's name, desperately trying to reach him, while Ran watched everything from the crowd. Deep down, he wished the true protagonist was here to see this. Far away, a lone traveler knelt beside a quiet river. Exhausted from his long journey, the young man scooped up water in his hands, ready to take a drink. But before he could, a strange glowing blue energy began to drift across the surface of the water. This strange phenomenon caught his eye instantly, forcing him to stare silently at the bizarre sight. Slowly lowering his hood. Yep, you and I already suspected it. It is the legendary Rattel himself, the true protagonist of this dark story.